Welcome back to CEEN Caribbean News. It's now time to go in depth. There are several debates across the Caribbean about whether the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, should be replaced as the head of state of CARICOM countries, a position she holds for all but 3 countries in the regional cohort: Dominica, Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. The new Jamaica Labour Party administration has promised to table in Parliament constitutional amendments to replace the Queen with a non-executive president as the head of state. Meanwhile, the opposition in St. Lucia has called for a similar move. The opposition says the country is now able to manage its own affairs, so it ought to become a republic. But is relieving the Queen as head of state really of benefit to regional countries? We explore this issue with Dr. Clinton Hutton from the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Welcome to In Depth, Dr. Hutton.
Hi, good evening.
Now, Dr. Hutton, what role does the Queen currently play as the head of state for Commonwealth countries?
Well, let us look at Jamaica. The representative of the British monarch in Jamaica is the Governor General. And therefore, the function of the Governor General is that of the function of the British monarchy. In other words, the issue of sovereignty resides in a foreign country, the former colonial power that controlled Jamaica for over 300 years. This is really a process of the continuation of some elements of colonial control, some elements of colonial culture. 50 odd years after independence, that we need to, the process of decolonization in this respect needs to be hastened. Manley in the 1970s actually raised the issue and the need to change this. Many years after that, we're still on the same path, where a foreign power is in effect represents the symbol and signature of sovereignty in this country.
Now, the Queen's control over countries for which she's the head of state is rather limited. What's the importance? Pardon?
I didn't hear.
The Queen as head of state for Commonwealth countries, the control that she has over those countries is rather limited. What's the importance of ridding her of the position of head of state?
We are supposed to be a sovereign nation, deciding on our own destiny, after emerging out of hundreds of years, first of all, of a colonialism in which slavery played the most important role, and then after that over 100 years of colonial control by a foreign power. By a foreign power representing identities that are in contradiction to our struggle for freedom, for sovereignty, for a sense of self, for dignity. That relic needs to be abolished, and sooner the better. We're a sovereign people. We must live up to that.
In terms of international relations, is there any effect from the removal of the Queen as head of state, be it positive or negative?
Not at all. We're a sovereign country. We're a member of the United Nations. We're independent, save for this issue that we are now discussing. And it also represents itself in the Caribbean court. It is time that we stand up and on our own 2 feet in respect to these issues. As sovereign states, we have the right to engage in international relations as we see fit, and therefore the continuation of British monarchy as symbol and signs of our sovereignty really ought not to be if we really consider ourselves to be dignified people. We are we are really we really need to honor our ancestors and our own sense of self, and to discontinue this rather embarrassing, as far as I'm concerned, feature of our existence.
Why was the relinquishing of the Queen as head of state not considered at the time of independence from Britain?
Because of how independence was granted. It was a big compromise which was designed to allow the British to leave, but to remain. To remain in the first place by controlling the commanding heights of the economy. To remain in the sense of having a type of culture that will favor British values and British position, global position. It was an independence that came by way of granting a certain number of privileges to a class of people who were considered to be more sympathetic in values to British culture and British sensibility, in order to keep the majority of Caribbean people and Jamaican people in particular, who are people of African descent, to keep the bulk of them in check, so that British culture, British sensibility, British values, and indeed British power relationships in the world could continue, even though Jamaica became an independent nation. And it would be the same for the rest of the Caribbean countries that were ruled by the British.
Now, in the last
so the independence really was that to continue to have the British around, benefiting from the people and their resources in their absence, really.
Okay, now in the case of many of these countries, independence was attained like some decades ago. For Jamaica, it has been 5 decades already.
Yes.
But we've seen this debate spur up in the last couple of years. Why now?
Well, it has always been, there has always been a tendency in the Jamaican movement for independence. And prior to that, if we look at the antecedents of Jamaica's independence, the struggle of people like, last year, just a few months ago, we marked the 150th anniversary of the Morant Bay Uprising. We know of the works of Marcus Garvey. We know what happened to Sam Sharp. There has always been a history of struggle against the brutishness of British imperial rule. So there's always been people before independence and during the period of independence who have always struggled for sovereignty, for a sense of our own worth, standing in our own 2 feet as dignified people. It's not that issue was always not here. At different time, the issue became more pronounced and hence more upfront in the national agenda of nation building. So it has always been with us. In the 1970s, when Michael Manley was in power, it gained a lot of attention. It is now reasserting itself again. And the more people advance in the world, the more time passes by, is the more we recognize that really we are equal people. We can't talk about equality. We can't talk about dignity. We can't talk about destiny without the development of our own agency, our own sense of self, in charting our path in this world. We are equal people on the face of this planet. Nobody else is more better than us, more dignified than us, brighter than us. It's time we really deal with this issue.
Now, for countries that have mentioned getting rid of the Queen as the head of state, they've noted appointing a non-executive president, as was done in Dominica and in Trinidad and Tobago. The head of state in Guyana, however, is the president. But why does there seem to be a need for a separate head of state from the leader of the country? Why can't the prime minister perform that function?
So I think different countries will take different paths to this issue of sovereignty. Some will tread carefully. And I think that is what is happening to most of the Caribbean territories. They will also tread as far as protecting their own position as a political class in different Caribbean territories. But in the final analysis, the experience of the people will show what path best suits each country to develop their own sense of self, their own national institution, their own ways of thinking and conceptualizing themselves in the world. So I wouldn't worry too much. It is up to the social forces in the Caribbean, broadly speaking, and more specifically in individual countries, to decide what best would enable this country to stand up, to have its own footing in the world, in collaboration with the rest of the Caribbean. And the rest of the Caribbean mean not just CARICOM, no, but beyond CARICOM. We are human beings, like any other human being in the world, and we will eventually find our way.
All right, thank you. We have to cut it there, Dr.
Okay.
Hutton, unfortunately. Thank you so much for speaking with us.